Hello and welcome back after that quick break. Now, next up, we have Korinna, I'm going to try and get this right, Németh-Szabó. I hope that I didn't butcher that too much in my English. Anna is the one who docs, and seriously, I adore that as a description, the one who docs. Technical writer advisor at Quest Software, a one identity, and their pronouns are they, them, and their. Anna is in her 30s, has an intensive gaze, a colourful hairdo, and today is wearing a blue, it's not a blue top at all, that's me getting that completely wrong. It is a red top, a kind of burgundy top. It's, maybe I need to get new glasses. Anna, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, thank you, Tracy, for the introduction. I hope you can hear me all right. Just give me a thumbs up if you can.
Yeah, I can hear you well. And you're going to talk to us today about making products, how we can stop making products less than inclusive for neurodiverse users, how we can make them better, best practices, and yeah, help the neurodiverse audience too.
Yeah, and actually a lot has been said before, so I might not be saying anything really new here, but I'll try my best. So,
it's still important to say again.
Yeah,
and
right.
In which case, I will give the floor to you. Take it away.
Thank you. Let me just share my screen. And there you are. Hey, so good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining my session. So yeah, I'm a technical writer with a passion for making life simpler and easier for users. But more importantly, I am neurodiverse myself. I live in a world that is clearly not optimized for people who think different. So I can give really authentic insights about some of the challenges that we face on a daily basis. Before I begin, though, a fair warning, heads up. I am neurodiverse, so bear with my funny facial expressions, and I will often, lack eye contact with the camera. I'll do my best, but yeah. And also, I'm not an expert in this topic. And while I work with developers, I'm not a developer myself, so my insights are limited here as well. I will be focusing less on theory and more on giving hands-on experience and advice, especially because I only have like 20-25 minutes, which is way too short, actually. But I will link more resources, obviously. Important, when I say backend, just to clarify, I will mean the infrastructure, so code framework, basically. And when I say front end, that will mean the user visible elements. Since I have limited time, I will often abbreviate ND for neurodiverse, neurodivergent, and neurodiversity, and NT for more neurotypical. About this presentation and the slides, I did my very best, but I'm fairly certain it's not perfectly inclusive and accessible. I apologize. Now let's see what I hope to cover. First, some intro to neurodiversity and how society perceives it. Then diving deeper into the spectrum of neurodiversity and whether it is always a disadvantage or a disorder. Next, we'll see how most ND users differ from more NT users and about the issues that we ND users struggle with as a result. After that, tips and tricks to improve your products, and hopefully we will still have time left for Q&A. So let's go. Now, without diving too deep into the scientific and theoretical aspects of neurodiversity, a very short intro. Actually, I found a very awesome video on YouTube, and I will be reflecting on thoughts by counseling psychologist and psychotherapist Stephen Munt. Due to the shortage of time, I only summarized some of the most important things he shared, the very essence. So I recommend that you watch the whole video that I linked on the next slide. And first of all, for ND people, fitting in is hard work and an immense mental load. The world is definitely not optimized for people like us, so some of the struggles are daily. But we are the minority, so to speak, so we are expected to conform and adapt. To understand how that feels, consider the lockdowns and self-isolation due to the pandemic. A lot of people suddenly had to adapt to fundamentally different work methods, work-life balance, and behavior patterns than before. And the majority of them found it very hard, honestly. Very soon they kept saying, I want things back to normalcy. So imagine doing that every single day. And imagine that fitting in means the opposite of what you consider normalcy. And I'm not exaggerating, as I will tell you more about how we neurodiverse people function in a different way, you will understand why this is true for some of us. And yes, I say some of us because some handle these challenges a little better, but others get exhausted on a daily basis. But there is one thing in common with most neurodiverse people. It's that we usually have to go against our grain at least a little bit to conform and fit in. And that's a lot of hard work every day and in everyday situations, mind you. We literally struggle and we may even experience physical pain occasionally. So the important question here is, what can we do to at least try to make this world more inclusive for everyone, including neurodiverse people? So by sharing some challenges that we users, neurodiverse users face, and with the tips and tricks, I hope I can do something about this at least. So with that in mind, let's see some of the ways that ND users can be different from neurotypical users. I could say that our brains are wired in a different way. So the way that we receive and process information is different. And that's no small thing, mind you, because it affects literally everything. The way that we perceive and interpret the world around us, and how we can, in turn, communicate with others. And also, there is no one-size-fits-all way to how neurodivergent a person is, or to what extent. This is unique for everyone. It only makes sense to think about neurodiversity as a wide spectrum. And in some cases, you can hardly tell a person is neurodiverse. Apparently, my neurodiversity is not always obvious for everyone. So then how can you tell someone is neurodiverse? Can you give me a few examples for neurodiverse conditions? Sure, there you are. For example, trauma, epilepsy, ADD, Asperger's syndrome, OCD, chronic fatigue syndrome, dyslexia. These are a few ND conditions, and there's more. Now, you probably notice autism spectrum disorders listed here. Yes, autism spectrum disorders and neurodiversity may have an intersection, but let's make this very clear. They are not the same. This intersection, if it exists at all, it varies from person to person. And also, frankly, I hate the term disorder. I think using the term condition is a lot better, especially since these conditions can be an advantage as well. For example, strategic thinking can prove very useful. Some of us have excellent memory or a very high attention to detail. Most of us are very autonomous workers and creative, out-of-the-box problem solvers. So we should regard these traits as talent, not a disorder. And we are just as vulnerable as we are talented. Say the lack of sleep or caffeine, personal issues, being ill, sad, or irritated, or something going wrong. Now, these are stressors that can fully consume our mental and emotional capacity. I will later provide a link to a brilliant presentation by a fellow neurodiverse person, Ryan McLean, if you're interested in further details about how these work. These factors can also influence how successfully we filter the important information and stimuli, and how effectively we can maintain our focus. And sometimes, even when we are basically okay, filtering can still be very hard. For example, because some of us have brains and sensory organs wired to be receptive to all stimuli. Trust me on this, it's not always fun. Perhaps it's not surprising that some neurodiverse people absolutely hate chaos and turbulence and prefer stability instead. Now, not all of us need it to the same degree, but an organized environment usually helps us function a little better. And this is also true for organized thinking and for clean and linear categories, processes, and workflows. They decrease our mental load a lot. And speaking of mental load, with a very high attention to detail, even minor inconsistencies can draw our attention. And this can be confusing sometimes. As in, is this intentional or is this just a typo? Am I supposed to do anything about it? And we can ruminate over these a lot. And we can also get distracted very easily. I mean, sometimes our attention span is amazingly short. I admit that some days it's a Herculean task for me to stay focused. And then some other days I become quite the opposite, hyper-focused. Actually, many of us alternate between those two extremes. And when we are in hyper-focus mode, we might forget to eat or drink for 5 or 6 hours or more. True story. And especially when we are in this hyper-focused state, the tight deadlines can be a source of eustress. They can make us even more productive, and some of us absolutely excel in these situations. But for some of us, time pressure can be debilitating. And no matter how hard we try, sometimes we get super confused and we have no idea which year this is. You know the proverb, some days I'm brilliant and other days I put my socks in the fridge? That's true. And we're in this state of mind when we're lost. We need guidance, orientation, or even better, very quick help. We just want out of there, believe me. We just don't want more work to do. So what are some product-specific challenges that we face? For example, we can get information and sensory overload very easily. Often our senses are very delicate, so sounds can be too loud, colors can be too bright. For photosensitive neurodiverse people, flashing lights are painfully overwhelming. And sometimes too many people's physical presence at the same time is draining. So personal experience, I can handle maybe 7 or 8 people at the same time, no more than that. And same for Zoom, for example. Speaking of overload, some of us are good at multitasking, but not all of us are. I'm not. Shifting back and forth between multiple tabs, screens, or even devices can be very challenging. And when we can't change the circumstances or UI settings that are uncomfortable for us, it can get very frustrating, and we will probably hate that situation or product. Idioms, proverbs, figures of speech, abbreviations, jargon, and sometimes even humor may be problematic for us, especially if we do not share the same first language. So fun features and design, for example, what the GitKraken client does, those are very sweet, but only if the product is otherwise very intuitive and easy to use. Which brings us to talking about how we can address those issues in our products. First, making our backend more ND-proof. Start with making the code framework robust. Duct tape workarounds in the code will surface sooner or later, and you often have to make up for them on the UI. That will complicate UI designs and strings, UX writing, usability, user assistance, documentation, and even product support. So the better your foundation on the back end, the less you will struggle on the front end. Also, keep in mind that products should facilitate users. If the user only gets different kinds of challenges to deal with, that defeats the purpose. Consider, if your product is supposed to do complex calculations, but it's much easier for the user to do these calculations using pen and paper, you are doing something wrong. So design with your products with this in mind. Now, what about the front end, so the user visible part? First of all, the overall design should be intuitive and imperceptibly facilitating. If it's confusing, that's very counterproductive. Anything that makes you stop and say, huh? That's not good UI. So remember that your product is usually a tool that should make users' work easier. So your product's features and options should be unambiguous, unless you mean to make them puzzles and riddles on purpose for some reason. Use consistency and industry standards, or at least a very intuitive UI elements and terminology. Also, help your users avoid information overload and getting lost. Reduce the amount of information to not too much, but not too little. Highlight the important elements, but not too many of them. If you seem to have several equally important features, definitely reconsider the UI structure. I know it's hard to find the right balance here, but for some of these issues at least, there are available templates and guidelines. I will link some later on. A word about dark mode. I use 3 screens by default. I read and write a lot. I have to scan code, detect pattern inconsistencies, and so on. So the default mode is way too straining for my eyes, and it overstimulates me, especially late in the afternoon. I hate it, honestly. But remember, that's not necessarily true for everyone. So customizable modes are probably the best for your product, but at the very least, offer the dark mode option. And please, please, please don't put videos or sounds on autoplay. Remember, some of us are very sensitive to stimuli. For example, if the screen goes black suddenly, or perhaps there is a video popping up, it can be downright shocking. And a loud video on autoplay, especially when our speakers are on high volume or full volume, it can be painful. Also, if the video is a tutorial and we cannot even pause it or replay it easily, the chances are that we will miss something important. So make this customizable and at least give fair warning before something drastic or important is about to happen on the UI. And speaking of missing something important, I actually strongly advise you actually do this. You try it. Try using the product when you are very tired, sleepy, or preoccupied. Or perhaps have someone interrupt you with a long phone call. Do you perhaps run out of time, lose all the progress you've made so far, or get logged out due to timeout? If the answer is yes, set the default values for timeouts and timers much higher, or at least make them customizable, and support autosave for processes. We often assume that what seems easy or fun for us will be equally easy and fun for everyone else as well. Developers, for example, often underestimate the complexity of a product, but the workflow, the UI, the processes and tasks may be confusing or stressful for users. Which brings us to user assistance. How much does the UI need? And I've had so many battles with developers about this. I mean, yes, there is a limit to spelling everything out, but trust me, when things do go wrong, the user will be stressed. So it's much better to provide more embedded assistance than too little. Good layout and UI strings, logical and straightforward workflow, and meaningful default values help a lot. And in case you worry about being too condescending, there is always progressive disclosure, so the user can decide exactly how much help they want. I have a few more tips and tricks to consider on both ends. For example, try to think ahead, keeping a wide spectrum of user personas and their challenges in mind. Implement your features and UI settings so users can personalize them easily. Also, implement security by design, because just remember, we are human. Try to think ahead about what could go wrong. And if I want to put this very oversimplified, just do not let us mess things up. Take precautions. If a procedure takes long, or if the user has to shift between multiple tabs or screens, warn them in advance. And the same applies for prerequisites for procedures. Alternative options for product-human interaction and two-factor or multi-factor authentication also facilitates ND users. Some of us prefer audio, others like written text, and still others are a lot more visual, so graphics are the best. Let the user customize. For video tutorials, always provide audio as well. For 2FA or MFA, do not only provide visual capture or mobile device option. After all, we may have forgotten to charge our phone. Nope, not kidding. It can happen. And while you can make the UI very intuitive, you will need some text for error messages, UI elements, tooltips, on-screen help, or alt text, for example. Get technical writers and UX writers to make these meaningful, informative, and user-friendly. They are the communications experts who consider accessibility and inclusivity as well as usability. Never leave them out of the development process. Also, always involve a diverse set of testers, including neurodiverse testers. This will require a different approach, but it's worth the effort because neurodiverse testers out-of-the-box insights and thinking are invaluable. Trust me, if there is a glitch somewhere in your product, a neurodiverse person will probably spot it. True story. And neurodiverse testers can definitely improve your product's overall quality and usability. And before you say, this is just too much work, consider that there are templates, guidelines, and existing product UIs available. I've linked a few of them here, and actually, there is no need to go too far. I am using one of the Microsoft Office accessible presentation templates for these slides right now. So, to summarize all of that, here are the 3 key takeaways. First, good products start with good framework, as in code, framework, and facilitation. Second, always consider and accommodate the diversity of your users with mindfulness, customization, inclusivity, and accessibility. And third, work with neurodiverse users to make your product better for everyone, in fact, not just neurodiverse users. Time for a shout out. I highly recommend that you check out these online presentations at Write the Docs Prague 2021 virtual conference. Kat Stoika-Ostenfeld has invaluable insights about applied linguistics and technical writing, for example. And I already mentioned Ryan McLean's presentation about how our state of mind can influence a lot. Check out these awesome people. I'm sorry, excuse me. So check them out. I also want to thank these wonderful artists for the illustrations I used. They are on unsplash.com and on pixabay.com. And I promise to bring you some more resources. So feel free to read more about neurodiversity, personas, and other topics as well. And my voice is breaking up, so thank you for your attention, and we hopefully have a few minutes for Q&A. Thank you.
Hey, thank you for that. That was awesome. That's, I think there's a lot of insights there into how we can help people. A lot of it, yeah, some of it definitely hit home for me. I wonder if your voice will let you, hopefully your voice is going to recover a little bit for us. Can you give any examples of very bad product experience, user experience that you've had without giving names, of course?
Yeah, well, it's quite recent, actually. I'm really mad at my internet service provider at this point because in theory, you can extend your online contract online using a website. Except, in reality, it's just confusing. The UI is a disaster. You cannot find what you're looking for. They have no contact email information, only this badly done form that you fill out claiming your issue. And when you do submit that form magically, then you just don't get any confirmation that it's submitted. And after a while, you just don't get any reply. I mean, it's been for weeks. So it's 0% customer satisfaction, 0% helpfulness, and 100% frustration. So just don't.
Yeah, I can imagine that sends your anxiety through the roof when you're having to deal with that.
Yeah, that, and it's a pandemic situation. I mean, even if I'm not neurodiverse, I just don't want to go there in person to deal with this. And I have a life, I want to do different things. So if you say that I can do this online, let me do this online. So yeah,
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Totally go with that one. Another question for you. As a neurodiverse person, what is the most severe challenge that you have in today's world?
Actually, it's hard to decide if it's the inefficient communication that I encounter sometimes, or the information and stimuli overload. Actually, they are somehow connected sometimes. But I guess if I had to pick, it's just the overload. It's just way too much going on and way too noisy. It's very difficult for me to handle that. So I would say that's it.
Okay. And I think leading on to that one, because that is a very busy and can be a very noisy environment, certainly mine is, unfortunately. But how do you handle office-based work if you did that before the pandemic hit and we all had to go home?
Yeah, I used to do that. I used to work in a primarily office-based environment. Unfortunately, it was an open office. I would have died in there. No, but no, it was still, when it was busy, I found it very hard to focus and to stay in flow or even get in flow. And as a technical writer, it's very important for us because sometimes we just need that. So I can't even remember at this point how I handled it, but then when the pandemic happened, we shifted to working from home, and actually I find it easier this way. So many people complain, or they want things back to normalcy, like I mentioned, and I understand that, but for me, this works a lot better. At this point, actually, the biggest issue I have is my living environment, because some of my neighbors are obnoxiously loud and inconsiderate. But apart from that, I have zero problem with working from home. I just get more productive. I can do work-life balance a little more. So yeah, it works a lot better for me.
I completely agree with you for all of that. It's for my anxiety, working from home is just it's just subdued so much compared to actually having to be in the office and deal with people and trains and passengers and everything else.
Yeah, right. I mean, the commute itself, it can be draining. I mean, yeah, I get it. I can relate.
Yeah, the only thing I miss is podcast time, to be honest. That's completely gone out of my life. Okay, well, I think that we're about out of time. I want to thank you for that great talk and for the awesome Q&A session at the end. It's been fantastic. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your evening.